I've experienced a few creepy things in my life, but this I will always remember. It first started when I was 14 and ended in my late 20s. When I was in high school, I had a best friend named Andrew and my cousin Joseph. We did everything together and hung out often. They lived near each other in a bad part of town, but I'd often go visit them every week, and we'd walk to a park that was nearby to hang out and just talk about life. Next to the old park was a maintenance tunnel. It had two entrances leading underground beneath where the park was. Shallow water ran out from them and into a creek. The tunnels were made of concrete and the entrances on both sides were square. Outside had a concrete ramp sloping down towards them, and one day we decided to sit down on them and look into the tunnels. We noticed graffiti on the left one, above a corner, that said, "This way to hell." Being young and thinking we were brave, we wanted to go see what was down there. The ceiling was low, so you had to crouch to walk in there. We got about 10 feet in and realised if we went further we wouldn't be able to see anything, so we planned on getting flashlights and going back. Our mums bought us cheap flashlights that could barely shine, so we made it just a little further than last time, but we could see some of the graffiti inside. One said, "Run, boys and girls." As you got further down the corner and turned to the right, there was a final warning that said, "You're halfway to hell now," with an arrow pointing in the direction of the turn. At that point, we couldn't see anything around the corner, so we said we'd save up for good flashlights and come back. About a week later, I get to class, and my cousin, who usually jokes often with me, looked shaken up. He was quiet and didn't say much. I finally asked him what was wrong, and he hesitated to tell me, but finally said, "Me and Andrew went into the tunnel yesterday by ourselves. My mum bought me a powerful flashlight, and I ran ahead of Andrew. When I got to the corner, I turned and the light shined on something. It was dark and big. When the light hit its back, it turned its head towards me and stood up all the way." He had a serious expression on his face, and I could tell he wasn't joking. I wanted to believe him, but Andrew had a habit of lying, and I figured maybe Joseph and him were trying to prank me. We didn't go into the tunnels for a while, but one day I went to stay over at Andrew's, and he invited over a girl from class to hang out. We told her about the creepy tunnel, and she wanted to see it, so we went there while it was dark, and her being braver than both of us, she kept going ahead. Andrew tried to warn her, practically begging her to slow down. We turned the corner and proceeded to go down the tunnel. This part was longer, and even with 3 flashlights, it was difficult to see much. There was no graffiti around, just shallow water. We got to a wall that had a smaller circular hole that led down further, and just before that, the ceiling arched upwards. We stood up to stretch our backs. Me being 6'4", I was able to stand up all the way with my head still not hitting the top. As we stretched, I saw something. It suddenly hit me what Joseph had said about seeing something stand up at the end of the tunnel, a part that neither of us had reached before until now. And I looked at Andrew and said, Joseph wasn't lying. We left and went back to Andrew's. We told Joseph what happened, and at this point, although we were scared, it was still something scary to show others. He called me one morning to tell me his cousin stayed over the night before, and that after telling him, his cousin wanted to see it, but not to go in, just to see where it was. Joseph's mum was a little strict on him leaving past a certain time of night, so when she fell asleep, they snuck out in the middle of the night to go see it. When they arrived, Joseph said they walked down the concrete ramp and heard voices, like multiple people talking from down the tunnel. He went to get closer and stepped into the water, when he heard voices in a commotion saying, "Someone's here," then splashing from down the tunnel as multiple footsteps began running, making an echo. He said he and his cousin ran all the way back to his house, afraid that someone might have seen them or even followed them. He got his grandpa's rifle and kept it by him, not knowing what to expect, but nothing happened. One night I was at home and my aunt Priscilla came over. So it was me, my sister Renee, my aunt, my sister's friend Erica, and a friend of mine named Michael. We started telling scary stories and I brought the tunnel up. My aunt asked where it was and offered to drive over because she wanted to see it. This got everyone's interest. I went outside to tell my dad where we were going, and he told me that incidents happened down there with kids when he lived in that neighbourhood, and he handed me a pocket knife if I insisted on going in there. When we arrive, Erica says she's staying in the car. I called Andrew and Joseph and asked if they wanted to come with us in a big group. I guess safety in numbers, and since we didn't see anything last time, I figured it was the smart way to go. Once they arrived, we all went in. As we got to the corner and turned, my sister started to get ahead of me by a few feet. I was trying to catch up while holding the light ahead to shine with hers when I saw the light reflect off of something dark. I immediately stopped and started to tell Renee to get back. She either didn't hear me or didn't care, and took 2 more steps, and shined the light upon what I had mine aimed at. Something crouched down, with its back turned at first. It turned its head back towards us, and stood up. The skin was solid black, and the light seemed to shine off of it, almost glistening. From what I could tell, it was massive, its head near the ceiling where the roof arched upwards. The thing I could clearly see were its red eyes, just 2 embers in the dark, staring down at us. I've never heard my sister scream like that, just pure terror in her voice. She turns to run past me, pushing my arm, yelling at me to run. My entire body locked up from fear, but she didn't see I was still behind and kept running. I'd never been so scared that my body refused to move. I panicked and grabbed my leg, forcing it to budge, and then the other. Too afraid to look up, but I could hear this thing was headed my way. As soon as my legs could move, I turned and ran faster than I've ever run in my life. I ended up being the first person out of the tunnel, despite the rest of the group, including my sister, being ahead of me. We agreed to never enter that place again. A couple of months later, me and Andrew went to the park to hang out and saw a birthday party nearby, so I suggested we go into the entrance of the tunnel, where the light from the sun was still visible, just to have some privacy and talk and not intrude on the party. He was hesitant at first, but agreed as I told him I wasn't going in anywhere near the darkness. We got into the entrance area, and the uneven ground elevated near a spot, making the water run around it, creating a dry spot. We sat down and began talking for a bit until we heard some kids from the party come down to the entrance and ask us what we were doing. We tried to encourage them to go back, and when they insisted on staying to ask questions, I told Andrew, "Let's get out, I don't want them coming down here." We went to leave, and as we came out we saw a man telling the kids to go back. He turned and looked at us and asked, "What were y'all doing down there?" I told him we were just talking and hanging out. His face turned serious, and he asked, "Did you see that thing down there?" I felt my heart begin to pound. This was a complete stranger. We had never seen him before. I tried to pretend I didn't know and asked, "What thing?" in a quiet voice. He began to raise his voice and said, "That thing, that big black no-name motherfucker, did you see it?" We stayed quiet until I finally asked, "How do you know about that?" He said, "Let me tell you something, man. When me and my friends were your age, we thought we were brave and cool and went down there too. You ain't got no business going down those tunnels, you hear me?" He was getting angry, although we weren't arguing. That is, until he began to yell. Andrew began to backtalk and tell him he didn't need to listen to him. Andrew was short and stocky, and me being a big teen, I was too scared to say anything. Small guy syndrome, I guess. Suddenly, a man from the party, drunk, came down to the area and went to unzip his pants and relieve himself in the water away from us, and said, "Man, where did you go? We were looking for you." The man replied, "I'm just talking to these kids." The drunk man asked him to hurry up, and they returned to the party. As they were leaving, the man turned back and pointed a finger at us and said, "I'm serious, stay the fuck out of those tunnels," then walked off without waiting for a reply. Andrew finally expressed how scared he was, but didn't want to show the man, so he tried to be brave and talk back. We went to his house and made a promise to never go in there again. Many years later, in my late 20s, I told some friends and I agreed to go show them the entrance. The graffiti warning was still there. Trees had overgrown, covering the top of the entrance, with hanging limbs and leaves, and a gate was installed blocking the entrance to both sides, with a sign that said, "No trespassing." I'm not sure why it was installed, but to this day, at age 36, it still gives me the creeps to think of our experience in there, and how foolish we were playing with our lives, just because we were young and dumb.